Hey, it's late August in the Great Lakes region, and that means perch fishing time. As the sun gets lower in the sky and the water temperature drops, the fish will start to feed heavily to fatten up for the winter. So today I'm going to go over some tips to help you find and catch more perch. And make sure you stick around to the end because the last two tips are critical to being able to feel the bite when the fish are very finicky. Before we get into it, please remember to hit that like button, ring that bell, and subscribe to our channel. This triggers YouTube to get the video out in front of more viewers, which really helps the channel. Thanks. So the first step is to find online fishing reports that indicate there are perch biting off of a given port. As big as the Great Lakes are, it makes sense to do this homework prior to going out. I use the Michigan Sportsman's Forum here in Michigan. It's a good online resource to find folks that are catching fish. But all of the states and the province of Ontario, which all border the Great Lakes, have their own respective online forums that you can use to get an indication of whether or not the fish are active in that given area of the lake. So now that you're on the water, the next thing to do is look for packs of boats. If you don't see them right away, one thing you can do to find them is to look for flashes of light along the horizon. A lot of times, especially on sunnier days, the sunlight will reflect pretty heavily off the windshields of these boats, and as they bob up and down in the water and change the angle on that windshield, eventually the light will catch your eye. So just kind of scan the horizon and look for that if you're not seeing packs of boats directly, but finding the pack of boats will help you zero in on where the fish are. And now that you've found a pack of boats and have an indication of where there are schools of perch, the next thing to do is to start scanning the bottom on the outside of the pack using your sonar. I don't recommend going into the pack because oftentimes by the time you get set up there, these perch schools are moving around, and oftentimes they will have moved off the center of that pack and they're starting to move in whatever direction the bait fish are carrying them. And what you want to look for are patterns like this. This is a school of perch on the bottom. This is kind of what it looks like on a sonar unit. Little squiggles right along the bottom. Oftentimes it will just look like a contour similar to the bottom, like you might see a double line on the bottom. And if you see a lot of that, that's an indication that there's perch there and they're just hugging the bottom really tight. So the next tip is to use braided line when fishing for perch. Perch can be a finicky fish when they bite. Even when they're hungry, sometimes the bite can be very light. And using a line that doesn't stretch helps detect that bite. The other situation where the braided line really comes in handy is in really deep water. I've caught perch before on some of the Great Lakes, and Lake Michigan in particular, where you might catch them in 70 feet or more. And it's very difficult for you to feel that bite at that distance if you're using a line that stretches like monofilament. So use the braid for the backbone of the line. You can still use a fluorocarbon leader at the bottom if you'd like, or whatever your perch rig is made out of. But the main line should be braid so that you can feel that bite. So two recommendations on the bait that you're going to use. One is to use emerald shiners. These are the natural forage food of perch on most of the Great Lakes. You can use other types of minnows, other species of minnows, but nothing will work as well as an emerald shiner. And the second thing is to make sure that when you're hooking your minnows, that you're hooking them through the jaw. Some people like to hook them through the body, and that works, and especially if the fish are feeding heavily and you're getting your bait down to the bottom and you're getting hit right away. That's probably fine. You're going to catch just as many fish. But if they're a little more finicky, emerald shiners don't last the longest, and they don't take a lot of damage without dying. So if the fish are being finicky and want a live minnow, by hooking them through the jaw, not only can they swim freely in the water, but they'll last a lot longer on your hook. And now for the most important two tips in this video. The first of which is to make sure that you're maintaining the correct line tension. Too often folks don't do this, and they may wonder why they're not catching as many perch as the folks in the boat next to them. And they may think that, well, the fish just aren't under my boat. And sometimes that's true, but oftentimes it's just because they're not holding that line properly to be able to detect the bite. To illustrate that, first here we have a line that is under too much tension. You can see that the rod is bowed. And what happens here when you put too much tension on the line is that oftentimes, especially in the waves, when you're out in the lake bouncing around, the waves will cause, with that heavy line tension, will cause the weight to lift up off the bottom. So you're constantly bobbing your weight up and down. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll never hit it, but it certainly makes it a lot more difficult to feel a bite. And when the fish are biting very lightly, that's just something that interferes with your ability to detect the bite. So it's best not to have it under too much tension. On the other hand, we don't want slack in the line either. When this happens, it makes it so that even if a perch bites it, they'll run with it a little ways before you detect it. And if they haven't spit it out, which is often the case because by that time they'll realize this isn't food and they'll spit it out, they'll either have done that or they'll have swallowed the hook. So by the time you do set the hook, now you've got a gutted fish, and if it's a fish you didn't want to keep, you just killed that fish for no reason. Ideally, what we want is what we have here, which is just enough tension to keep the line straight, but not bend the rod. Now, it can be difficult to hold this position for long periods of time. So one of the things you can do to help keep that line just right is to balance it on your finger. This takes a little bit of concentration, and it can get tiring, when you're standing there like this for long periods of time. But especially if they're finicky, and you really want to make sure you're detecting that bite and getting that line tension just right, there's always a balance point you can find somewhere just off the front edge of your handle on your spinning reel, where when you find it, the boat can come up, the boat can come down, and the rod, all it's going to do is sort of go with the flow. It'll tip up and it'll tip down as the boat moves up and down. And that keeps your line tension light, but just straight, and it gives you the best chance at detecting that bite when it comes. And the final tip is to keep your rod tip pointed down towards the water. The main reason for this is by doing so, it allows your eye to naturally look down the rod, which enables you to detect the deflection at the end of that rod when a fish hits. It's much more difficult to do that holding the rod horizontally. So that's going to do it for today. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comments. And if not, let me know what I could have done to make this video more useful to you. Also, if you've got ideas for future videos that you'd like to see, let me know that as well. And as always, thanks for watching.